Welcome. Before we get into this haunting true story, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because a lot of work went into uncovering the real events behind this incredible tale. This story is about a young slave boy in Mississippi whose survival defied every expectation. A story almost lost to time, and the inexplicable events that surrounded him throughout his life. The slave boy's birth in 1862 Mississippi was nothing short of extraordinary, though at the time, few understood the magnitude of what had occurred. Born into the harsh and unforgiving environment of a plantation, his arrival was marked by struggle from the very beginning. His mother, exhausted from the grueling labor she endured daily in the fields, had gone into labor alone in a small, dimly lit cabin. There were no doctors present, only a few fellow enslaved women who had assisted with births countless times before, yet none had ever encountered anything like this. From the moment he was delivered, the child's tiny body seemed frail, almost translucent, as if the weight of the world already pressed upon him. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and his limbs appeared impossibly thin. The women who assisted his birth whispered among themselves, concerned that he might not survive the night. Despite their fears, something about him refused to yield. His lungs drew air in faint, shallow gasps, each one more miraculous than the last. When the first cries emerged, they were barely audible, almost as if the air itself was struggling to carry his voice. Those present were struck silent, feeling an unexplainable mixture of relief and dread. The baby's mother, who had endured so much suffering in her life, could scarcely believe he had survived the birthing process. Every instinct told her to fear for his life. Yet every small movement of the child seemed to assert his determination to live. Word of his birth quickly spread across the plantation, carried by whispers and cautious glances. The master and his overseers, initially indifferent to the condition of yet another child born into slavery, were taken aback by reports of the baby's fragile survival. Even the local doctor, summoned later to examine him, could not explain how the boy had made it through the labor unscathed. He was a newborn that, by all known measures of health and vitality at the time, should not have drawn a single breath. Yet here he was, alive and responsive in the most delicate of ways. From the beginning, it was clear that this child was different. While other infants cried with unsteady and rhythmic urgency, signaling their will to live, this boy's first expressions of sound were irregular, almost otherworldly. They were faint, but in their rarity carried an intensity that unsettled those who heard them. His survival was not just a medical anomaly. It seemed to defy every expectation of life and death known to those around him. Those who watched him closely remarked on how his tiny chest would rise and fall against impossible odds, and each breath he took seemed to carry a weight far beyond his fragile frame. The boy's survival from the very first hours of life set the stage for a pattern that would follow him through every phase of his early existence. It became evident to the women who cared for him, as well as to the few who dared to study him, that there was something beyond natural explanation guiding him. While many babies in those harsh conditions succumbed quickly to infection, malnutrition, or exhaustion, this boy continued to draw breath, stubbornly, unexplainably, and with a persistence that would later become the subject of countless stories and rumors. Even among the enslaved community, where superstition and spiritual beliefs often intertwined with daily life, the boy's birth was seen as extraordinary. Some whispered that he had been marked by a higher power, a child touched by forces that ordinary mortals could not comprehend. Others feared him, sensing that the fragile life they now witnessed carried with it a strange power, a presence that would shape the lives of those around him in ways no one could yet predict. The first hours of his life established not only his remarkable survival, but also the aura of mystery and unease that would follow him through every chapter of his early years, cementing his birth as an event that defied every expectation, every law of nature, and every understanding of life itself. From the very beginning, the boy's survival seemed impossible to everyone who witnessed it. In the harsh environment of a Mississippi plantation in 1862, newborns were highly vulnerable, and infant mortality rates were staggering. Yet, against every expectation, this boy not only lived, but appeared to endure conditions that would have claimed almost any other infant. His first days were filled with struggle. Weak and frail, he seemed unable to nurse properly at first, leaving those who cared for him terrified that he would fail to gain strength. But each day, despite exhaustion and the constant threat of illness, he somehow grew stronger, his body responding in ways that doctors and caretakers could not explain. The overseers on the plantation, initially indifferent to the birth of yet another child, began to take notice. Their observations were not fueled by compassion, but by astonishment at the child's sheer resilience. Infants born to enslaved mothers often faced exposure, poor nutrition, and constant stress from the environment. Yet this boy seemed impervious to these dangers. When a fever swept through part of the slave quarters, taking several children with it, he alone remained unaffected, sleeping quietly through the sickness, while others succumbed. The midwives who had attended his birth whispered about his survival in awe, their hands trembling as they checked his pulse and marveled at the life that persisted in such a fragile frame. Even the local doctor, who was called in to examine the boy during his first month, could hardly believe what he saw. He conducted every test known to him at the time, checking for signs of illness, weakness, or congenital defects, yet the boy displayed none of the expected vulnerabilities. His heartbeat was steady, his skin, though pale, showed no signs of disease, and his lungs drew air with a regularity that seemed almost deliberate. The physician's notes, later found in a small journal, reflect a tone of disbelief, describing the boy as a child whom nature itself seems unwilling to relinquish to death. The boy's cries during these early weeks were equally peculiar. Unlike other infants, whose cries were erratic and often desperate, his were measured and hauntingly clear. Those who heard them felt an unusual sense of foreboding, as if each sound carried weight beyond a simple call for attention. It was during these moments that some of the enslaved women began to speculate that the child's life was touched by forces beyond their understanding. Some whispered prayers for protection, while others simply watched in silence, uncertain whether to celebrate his survival or fear it. Throughout this period, the boy continued to defy every expectation. Simple illnesses that might have claimed other infants seemed to bypass him entirely. Minor injuries that would have left a child weakened left him unscathed. Even the harsh climate, which could be brutal for newborns in the South, did not appear to affect him. He survived scorching summer heat, sudden chills, and long periods of insufficient care without faltering. Every day he remained alive, The adults around him grew increasingly convinced that he was unlike any child they had ever known. As word of his resilience spread quietly through the plantation and nearby communities, the mixture of awe and fear deepened. Other children who fell sick or died seemed to mark a contrast to his impossible survival, highlighting the extraordinary nature of his existence. The boy became both a symbol of hope and a harbinger of unease, a child who could not be explained by medicine, science, or common understanding. His very life challenged the beliefs of those who observed him, forcing them to consider that some things in the world might lie beyond human comprehension. By the end of his first year, it was clear that the boy's survival was not just an anomaly, but the beginning of a pattern that would define his early life. Every illness, every near-death experience that should have claimed him, instead passed him by. The adults who cared for him grew simultaneously protective and wary, recognizing that his existence was remarkable, yet carried an air of unpredictability. In these formative months, the foundations of his legend were laid, as the boy continued to endure, to breathe, and to live in ways that defied every expectation, every calculation, and every law of nature known to those who surrounded him. From the earliest moments of his life, the boy seemed to exist in a world governed by rules that no one could understand. The illnesses and accidents that should have ended him simply did not. During his first months, minor fevers that had claimed the lives of other children swept through the quarters where he lived. His siblings, cousins, and neighbors fell one by one, their small bodies succumbing to sickness and exhaustion. Yet he remained untouched, sleeping quietly through the nights, while others fought for breath. Those who witnessed this began to whisper among themselves, some calling it a miracle, others a curse. For every time he survived, there seemed to be a shadow of misfortune lingering nearby. Accidents that would have severely injured or even killed him happened repeatedly, and each time he emerged unscathed. One afternoon, while crawling near the hearth, he toppled into a shallow fire pit. His mother screamed and lunged toward him, expecting to find him burned beyond recognition. But when she reached him, he was unharmed, suit covered but breathing, his eyes wide and calm. Word of this spread quickly among the enslaved families, and fear mingled with awe. How could a child survive such incidents repeatedly, without lasting harm? Some suggested divine protection, others speculated that his body itself was somehow extraordinary. Even more baffling were the illnesses that others believed he had contracted but never did. During a smallpox outbreak on the plantation, several children and adults fell gravely ill. The boy, however, displayed no symptoms. He was exposed, in close contact with infected individuals, yet he remained perfectly healthy. The plantation's doctor examined him multiple times, searching for signs of infection or immunity, but found nothing that could explain his resilience. It was as though he carried some invisible shield, one that kept him safe from the diseases that had decimated the community around him. Every recovery he made defied reason. When he fell from a hayloft, landing awkwardly on a wooden floor, everyone expected broken bones or at least bruising. Yet he crawled to his mother, seemingly unharmed. When he contracted a persistent cough from the cold winter air, it disappeared after a day or two, leaving him as vibrant as before. The enslaved women caring for him began to notice a pattern. Every time he encountered danger or sickness, he emerged unscathed. Yet those around him often suffered in ways that seemed linked to his survival. It created a mix of reverence and fear. He was both cherished and avoided, protected and yet mysterious. The boy's resilience also affected the adults' perception of him. The plantation's overseers, who had initially dismissed the child as fragile and unremarkable, began to treat him differently. Some approached him with caution, as if wary of his unusual luck, while others simply ignored him, unsure of how to categorize someone who defied every natural law. The enslaved community, though protective, became increasingly silent about his abilities, fearing that speaking too loudly of his survival might attract attention from the master or the wider community, who might not understand. Perhaps most unsettling were the subtle patterns that began to emerge. Each time the boy survived an accident or illness, misfortune seemed to strike someone nearby. A child fell ill, a worker suffered an injury, a fire broke out in a barn. It was never direct or immediate, but the correlation was enough to make those who observed him uneasy. They could not prove causation, yet the timing was too precise to ignore. His survival was miraculous, but it carried a sense of shadow alongside it, a reminder that what he endured did not exist in isolation. By the time he reached toddlerhood, the boy had already survived incidents that would have ended the lives of most children multiple times over. Each experience reinforced the extraordinary nature of his existence. The adults caring for him grew more vigilant, watching over him with a combination of love, fear, and awe. They were certain that he was unlike any other child they had seen, and that his life, though fragile in appearance, was governed by forces beyond their understanding. This early period of his life established a pattern that would continue for years. The boy would face danger, illness, and misfortune, and yet he would endure. Every survival challenged the knowledge and expectations of those around him. Doctors, midwives, and fellow slaves alike were forced to confront the impossible, realizing that the boy's existence was not simply miraculous, it was unexplainable. And it was this unexplainable survival, marked by repeated brushes with death, that would define his life and shape the stories told about him long after he was gone. The boy's resilience did not go unnoticed, and the reaction of the plantation owners, local doctors, and the surrounding community quickly became a complex mix of awe, fear, and suspicion. For the master and his family, the boy was initially just another child born into slavery, someone who would one day be assigned work like any other. Yet, as reports of his miraculous survival accumulated, their attitudes began to shift. The overseers, who were tasked with maintaining order and productivity, observed the boy surviving illnesses and accidents that should have claimed him, and it unsettled them. They had no framework to understand why a child so fragile in appearance could endure such extremes, and some even whispered privately that his continued existence might bring misfortune to the plantation itself. Doctors called to examine him were equally baffled. Trained in the medical knowledge of the 19th century, they could diagnose fevers, infections, and malnourishment. Yet nothing they observed explained why this child thrived where others failed. When he survived a particularly severe case of dysentery, a condition that had claimed several infants on the plantation, the doctor was forced to admit that he had no medical explanation. His pulse, respiration, and body temperature all fell within normal ranges, yet his survival defied every expectation. Each time the boy escaped death, the medical practitioners grew increasingly uneasy, aware that science could not account for the pattern of his life. The broader community also took notice, and the boy's survival began to stir whispers that blurred the line between miracle and curse. Neighbors who visited the plantation often returned with stories of the strange child, describing him as unusually alert for his age, yet strangely quiet, almost ethereal. Some claimed to have witnessed minor accidents around him, which seemed to affect those nearby, but never touched the boy himself. These tales traveled quickly, and soon the name of the miraculous child became known beyond the confines of the plantation. While some regarded him with reverence, believing that he was protected by divine forces, others feared that his existence heralded something unnatural or ominous. Even among the enslaved community, the boy's continued survival prompted a mixture of pride, protectiveness, and unease. The women who cared for him, having witnessed his birth and earliest days, recognized that he was unlike any child they had known. They nurtured him carefully, yet they could not ignore the subtle disturbances that seemed to accompany his life. Livestock occasionally fell ill around him. Minor accidents would befall others, and sudden chills or strange sounds often seemed linked to his presence. While they loved and protected him, a deep undercurrent of fear persisted, a sense that his survival was not simply miraculous, but carried consequences that no one could predict or fully understand. Even the children of the plantation began to sense something unusual. Playmates would hesitate to get too close to him, reporting feelings of unease or a chill when he was near. Some whispered that he brought bad luck. Others, more mystical in their thinking, suggested he carried a blessing. This duality between reverence and fear permeated every aspect of his early life. The adults could not explain it, and the children only repeated what they felt. In many ways, the boy became a living symbol of contradiction, fragile yet indestructible, ordinary yet extraordinary, innocent yet carrying an inexplicable power over those around him. Over time, the adults on the plantation began to adjust their behavior toward him. He was watched constantly, even more closely than other children, to ensure that no accident would endanger him, and perhaps to mitigate any perceived influence he carried. His mother, who had already endured unimaginable hardships, became fiercely protective, insisting that he remain close to her at all times. The overseers and doctors, though concerned, also came to a grudging acknowledgement that the child's life could not be forced into the patterns they understood. Any intervention seemed unnecessary because, time and again, the boy emerged unscathed from situations that should have harmed him. This pattern of observation, fascination, and fear set the tone for his entire early existence. Every recovery, every unexplained survival reinforced the notion that he was extraordinary, and that his life could not be measured or explained by conventional means. The reactions of those around him, from the masters to the doctors, from neighbors to fellow slaves, combined into a constant awareness that the boy was different. They could admire him, fear him, protect him, or attempt to control him, but none could deny the unexplainable force that seemed to govern his survival. In doing so, the boy's life became not just a story of resilience, but a profound challenge to the understanding of life itself, leaving those around him to wrestle with awe, fear, and a deep, persistent sense of mystery. As the boy continued to survive against all odds, the stories of his unexplainable recoveries spread far beyond the plantation where he was born. Visitors from neighboring estates, curious townspeople, and even traveling traders began to hear whispers of the child who should not have lived but persisted, seemingly untouched by sickness, injury, or the hardships that defined life in 19th century Mississippi. Each account added layers to the legend as observers struggled to reconcile what they saw with what they knew about medicine, nature, and mortality. The boy's continued resilience became a point of fascination, drawing attention not only from the local community, but also from those who traveled long distances to witness his survival firsthand. Despite the growing attention, the boy's life remained shrouded in mystery. He endured illnesses that had claimed other children in the quarters and survived accidents that would have left others severely injured. Once, he fell from a barn loft while reaching for a stray kitten, a fall that would have broken bones in almost any child, yet he rose without a scratch. Another time, he contracted a high fever that swept through the nearby cabins, claiming 2 of his siblings in the process. He appeared weak and fragile for only a moment before recovering fully, as though the fever had never touched him. Each episode baffled the adults around him, who had long since given up on finding a rational explanation for his survival. The slave community, while protective of him, also began to notice a pattern. His extraordinary survival often coincided with misfortune striking elsewhere. While he remained unscathed, other children or workers would fall ill, animals would grow sick, or small accidents would occur on the plantation. These patterns were subtle but persistent enough that they sparked fear and speculation. Some whispered that he was blessed, a child chosen by divine providence to survive despite the world's cruelty. Others were more wary, fearing that his presence brought a strange, almost supernatural influence that could not be predicted or controlled. The duality of reverence and fear shaped how everyone interacted with him, fostering both protection and caution. Doctors and overseers, though increasingly perplexed, attempted to study him within the limits of contemporary medical knowledge. They observed his pulse, monitored his growth, and examined him after every accident or bout of illness, yet none could explain why he consistently defied mortality. Even as they acknowledged his resilience, there was an underlying tension, a recognition that his survival was not simply a product of chance or biology. The patterns surrounding him seemed to suggest forces beyond the understanding of science or the human mind at the time. These experiences left adults in a constant state of cautious vigilance, as if watching over him too closely might either trigger the misfortune they feared or prevent the miraculous persistence they could not explain. The boy's continued survival also had a profound psychological impact on those around him. His mother, exhausted from both labor and fear, became fiercely protective, often keeping him close and away from situations that might endanger him. Yet she could not fully shield him from the forces of the outside world. The other enslaved women, midwives, and caretakers experienced a mix of awe and anxiety, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary but incomprehensible. Each time the boy survived what should have been fatal conditions, their sense of wonder was tempered by unease, as they understood that the world they knew did not apply to him in the same way. By the time he reached early childhood, the boy's resilience had become the defining feature of his existence. Those who observed him regularly spoke of his uncanny ability to emerge unharmed from circumstances that would have destroyed other children. and the stories spread like wildfire throughout the surrounding counties. His life became a touchstone for discussions of fate, divine intervention, and the limits of human understanding. People could not explain his survival through conventional knowledge, and as a result, his presence became both a comfort and a source of fear, a living testament to the unexplainable, a reminder that life could sometimes bend the rules in ways no one could anticipate. Even as he grew, the boy remained a figure of intrigue and speculation. Each new incident of survival only reinforced the sense that he existed outside the ordinary bounds of life and death. Plantation owners, medical practitioners, and neighbors alike struggled to reconcile his repeated recoveries with their own understanding of the world, ultimately concluding that the child's life was governed by forces beyond human comprehension. In this way, the boy's extraordinary endurance became not only a personal story of survival, but also a phenomenon that challenged the community to confront the limits of knowledge, belief, and expectation, leaving a legacy that would be whispered about for generations to come. The legacy of the boy's story persisted long after his earliest days, echoing through the lives of those who had witnessed his inexplicable survival and shaping the collective memory of the communities around him. Even as he grew older, the tales of his early resilience continued to inspire awe, fear, and speculation. Families who had watched him endure the near impossible often spoke of him in hushed tones, passing down the stories to the next generation. To them, he became more than a child. He was a symbol of mystery, a living enigma whose existence challenged everything they believed about life, death, and the natural order. The story of the boy's survival was recorded in small journals, letters, and whispered accounts, though many were never published or widely shared. Plantation workers, cautious of the attention such a story might attract from outsiders, often recounted the events orally, preserving the memory of his resilience in the form of folklore. Each retelling added layers of interpretation, some emphasizing the miraculous, others the ominous, but all agreed on one point: the boy was extraordinary. His survival was not merely a matter of luck. It carried a significance that seemed to transcend ordinary understanding. Neighbors and travelers who had heard of the boy occasionally came to the plantation, hoping to witness the child who defied death firsthand. Their reports only fueled the growing legend. They described him as quiet, observant, and strangely composed, as if he carried the weight of his experiences with a wisdom beyond his years. Many claimed that he seemed aware of danger before it occurred, moving in ways that suggested instinct alone could not explain. Others remarked that misfortune often seemed to follow those who doubted or mocked him, though they could never articulate why. These accounts reinforced the aura of mystery surrounding him, solidifying his place as a figure whose life was intertwined with forces beyond comprehension. The boy's story also had an enduring emotional impact on the enslaved community. Mothers who had lost children to illness or accident saw in him a symbol of hope, a living reminder that life could persist even under the harshest conditions. At the same time, his survival carried a weight of fear, a recognition that his presence was accompanied by strange coincidences and inexplicable events. This duality, hope tempered by unease, became central to the way people remembered him, shaping both personal memory and collective narrative. As time passed, the details of his life became interwoven with local legend. Even after he was no longer a child, Stories of his survival persisted in conversations around fireplaces and at church gatherings. Elders would speak of the boy who should not have lived, recounting tales of his near-death experiences and miraculous recoveries. These narratives, though sometimes embellished over time, maintained the core truth. He had defied expectations in ways that could not be explained, and his existence had left an indelible mark on everyone who encountered him. Historians and folklorists, arriving decades later, often encountered fragments of these stories. They pieced together accounts from diaries, letters, and oral histories, attempting to make sense of what had occurred. While many approached the tale skeptically, the consistency of the reports was striking. Across multiple sources, the same patterns emerged: a child born into extreme adversity, surviving circumstances that should have ended him, and inspiring a mix of reverence, fear, and fascination. The boy's life, though once ephemeral and nearly lost to time, became a documented symbol of endurance and mystery. In the broader context of Mississippi's history, the boy's story came to represent more than personal survival. It became a lens through which people viewed the human capacity to endure against unimaginable odds. His life highlighted the resilience of those living under brutal conditions, the limits of contemporary medical understanding, and the ways in which extraordinary events can shape cultural memory. To the community that remembered him, he was not just a child who survived. He was a testament to the unexplainable forces that sometimes intervene in life, reminding people that the world is larger and stranger than they might imagine. Ultimately, the boy's legacy is defined by both his survival and the stories that followed. He lived a life that defied expectation and, in doing so, left a mark on the hearts and minds of those who witnessed it. His story endured because it was not just about one life, but about the mysteries of existence, the unpredictability of fate, and the ways in which extraordinary events resonate across generations. Even today, the tale of the slave boy who should not have lived remains a haunting reminder that sometimes life defies understanding, and the echoes of such survival can be felt long after the events themselves have passed.